as opposed to every other episode I've published, this is actually going to be a podcast style podcast where we talk through some topics. I have these topics on the screen with me. We've got a big ringer theme going on, starting with Ryen Russillo leaving the ringer, and the ringer isn't covering it, which is I dislike this. Bill Simmons and Ryen Russillo, this is what they do for a living. They look at these transactions, they look at the details, they talk about free agency and what's going on. Here we have a very significant departure from the ringer, and I don't expect them to get into all of the details, but Ryen Russillo, it is known that he's now leaving, and they're not talking about it. So the only clip I could find that I'm aware of is here on Twitter. So let's just take a listen.
Professionally, I have like a bunch of great things, but there's also a lot of professional uncertainty, which I actually kind of look forward to. I enjoy the.
So not much from Ryen, very ambiguous, and I think this is something that he'd normally be he'd be criticizing himself because he's like, hey, you've been on the ringer for 6 years. Can you go into some more detail? We've just found out that you're leaving, and apparently, let's now tab to a front office sports article. Apparently, this is independent, but he's got the backing. He's being invested in by Dave Portnoy and Barstool Sports. So let's go ahead and scroll down on this article. So it says Ryen Russillo's time with the Ringer is coming to an end, and he's poised to launch a new digital production company when his deal expires. So I also don't know what that means. Is that a podcast, a digital production company? Is it basically just a podcast with your own label, but you have the backing of Barstool Sports? So it says it's close to being done. And I don't, let's see, it says his contract with the Ringer is expiring soon. The exact date of the deal is not unknown. So Ryen is still publishing podcasts. I'm still seeing them on my phone come up, but he's leaving. And this actually brings to an end really a dream team that was assembling that I thought when the Ringer, when Bill Simmons brought on Zach Lowe, which by the way, that's another story because when he brought on Zach Lowe, I detected a hint of actually like a lack of enthusiasm, both on the part of Bill Simmons and Zach Lowe. It's like they got there, but there was some friction when they got there. That's just me reading into it. But I got the sense that when he signed, it wasn't as I felt like I was happier for them that we have Zach Lowe joining the Ringer than it came across like the enthusiasm I got from their side. Just me reading into it. But Zach Lowe is there now. And really, if you have Zach Lowe, Ryen Russillo, Bill Simmons, that is a very strong up and down NBA podcast lineup. But it's not going to work out. And I not that I listen to Ryen Russillo all that much. I listen to Bill Simmons primarily, and we're going to get to that in a moment. But with Ryen Russillo, I got the impression that it wasn't exactly what he wanted. Like it wasn't him in his prime, like his podcasting prime. And this is just the sense I got from it. So moving on from Ryen Russillo, we've got too much great content. And so with me and podcasts, and with everyone, right? You can only choose so much. There's so much great content out there. I really like Bill Simmons. I like Ryen Russillo, and I like Zach Lowe, et cetera, et cetera. But there's only so much you can listen to. And so with Bill Simmons, though, with me, and I don't know if this is accumulation, but he's just losing his footing with me. And so let's just go over a few points that I have on the big board. One is Cousin Sal. Cousin Sal to me is a weak guest, and of course he's the football. Bill brings on Cousin Sal for football, but Cousin Sal can't talk about the Cowboys. So every time the Cowboys come up, for some reason, because it's a sore subject for Cousin Sal, they have to gloss over it or they can only touch it briefly. So I find that annoying because the Cowboys they're such a lightning rod for discussion. And of course, we have Jerry Jones making so many bad decisions and the Cowboys over and over again failing, like trying to crawl up and then failing and then falling back down. And we have this NFL podcast from Bill Simmons, which I think he covers the NFL fairly well, but they don't talk about the Cowboys. Then we also have the rewatchables, which I don't fully understand. I don't listen to any of the rewatchables. I understand it's about movies, and Bill Simmons has people come on and they watch a movie together. But uh, to me, one theme I get from Bill Simmons is that he lacks focus. He's doing so many things, and you can't possibly be an expert in everything. And I know some of the seasons they don't overlap, so there will be times he can just focus in on NFL or the NBA. But I think it comes across like he's spread so far that his knowledge and expertise just has so many holes in it, and I think it ends up coming back to hurt him. So I just get that sense. That's the sense I get from Bill, is that you're doing too much, and I think he should focus on certain things. But maybe there is just he really likes movies and he likes watching this amount of TV. I could never ever watch this much TV. But even of all of the hours that he's consuming, you still can't cover everything. You still can't know everything. And I think sometimes when he has people that are actually hyper focused in on one thing, that shines through. I know Bill Simmons is primarily NBA, and then for the rest, he's a jack of all trades. But I think that comes back to hurt the podcast at times. And then I have here also glosses over so many highly relevant subjects. So I haven't been listening to the podcast lately, but initially, I definitely noticed the lack of coverage on the Clippers scandal and downplaying it. But it's not. This is not just about the Clippers scandal. I think one of my favorite segments he does is when he's takes on the conspiracy Bill persona, and he talks about some of the subjects that he normally won't broach. But even now, he's really dancing around everything, and I don't think it was always this way. When Bill was writing his column, I think he was more direct, and he would get into subjects, and he just doesn't do that as much anymore. And I think that's part because he's become bigger. So it happens when you have a media empire, you grow bigger, you have more influence, more people are paying attention to you, and then so what happens is, like a rock in the river, all of a sudden, like, your sharp edges start getting worn down. And I think that's what's happened with Bill. He's made so many friends. He's got relationships. He's got friends in sports, friends in media, relationships everywhere else. And so he's so popular. He's so influential that it's coming back now to really bring down what was once a really sharp podcast, or a really sharp column that he had, that he's moved over to podcasting with. Um, Another, so I didn't know that the big board was going to turn into a critique, but as I started writing, I kept thinking of more things to talk about, of why Bill Simmons is, I'm not listening to every episode the way I once was. And another part of this is when he talks about NBA teams, and he says what are they even doing? And so it's like the Miami Heat, and he'll talk about the Miami Heat, and he'll say, well, I don't even know what they're doing right now. And it's like he'll do that for so many different teams. And let's just take the Sacramento Kings as another example. Now, I can understand focusing in on the Suns, right? Because we saw the Suns with their owner, and I can't remember his name, but they raced to try as be as fast as possible, to be as competitive as possible. I can understand a critique more there. But when we look at all these NBA teams, it's like, what do you expect from each team? Like, what exactly is the flaw that this team is doing? They are all at a point in time. Everyone can't all be in the NBA finals, right? So there are going to be several teams that are going to be okay. They're going to be mediocre, and that's just how this is going to play out. So when Bill starts to go in on NBA teams and say, well, what are they even doing? Another example being the Memphis Grizzlies. They can't all, not everyone's going to be in championship contention. Even with the Nuggets, and I think he'll come back and he'll criticize the Nuggets, and it's like there's just only so much that every team can do. So I think as long as have a reasonable chance at winning the championship, or you're competitive, or if you're just at the cellar and you're trying to get out of the cellar, it makes sense. Now, if he was to critique the Bulls, that makes more sense, and he does critique the Bulls because they're frequently right in that mid range and they're not doing anything to advance, and they just one on this topic. One note is the one trade that really bothered me was the Alex Caruso trade. Why are the Bulls going to do the Oklahoma City Thunder a favor? Now I get it that there's potential with Josh Giddey, true, but why am I trading away Alex Caruso, who would be perfect for the Oklahoma City Thunder, and he's right, he's exactly what they needed, and you don't exactly need Josh Giddey. Yeah, Josh Giddey's a nice pickup, he's a nice piece, but you don't need him as much as the OKC Thunder need need I can't remember his name now, Alex Caruso. So that trade didn't make sense to me, and I think that goes to show why the Bulls have had such a problem. It's like, why are you helping out the Oklahoma City Thunder, who, by the way, are extremely lucky? One, let's just go on this tangent. The GM for the Thunder, Sam Presti, is so lucky, and he's looked at so favorably now. He traded away. He had Russell Westbrook, James Harden, and Kevin Durant, and he had them pre-prime, all on the same team. He never won a championship with them, and the team disassembled over the years. That's the GM that was at the helm. It was Sam Presti. Now he has Kawhi Leonard, and Kawhi Leonard demands that the Clippers get Paul George. The Clippers mortgage more, all of their future, all of that future, all of those picks, including Shea Gilgeous Alexander, which I'm not faulting the Clippers for. It wasn't known that he was going to be an MVP. Fine. But that's why the Thunder are so good and why their outlook's so good. So I don't understand why there's this lavish praise for Sam Presti. Sam Presti, he did great extracting as much as he did from the Thunder, but that's really luck. Like, he didn't. Kawhi Leonard's the one that forced that trade. The Clippers don't make that trade otherwise. So yes, they were the recipient of fortune, but it's not that Sam Presti is some mastermind. Now, he's probably a good GM, right? I don't pay attention to every transaction. It looks like he does a decent job, but he had a lot of help in the form of Kawhi Leonard. I've covered this in a video, actually. He got really lucky. And so from now on, even though he was the one that he blew, the having James Harden, Russell Westbrook, and Kevin Durant, now he's looked at very favorably despite doing so. Going back to the Bill Simmons podcast, uh, the All Star panel, that was close. It was really close. I thought Bill Simmons was assembling just really like the most rock solid NBA coverage you could have. And if I'm the ringer, that's what I'm focusing in on, because that's where your strength is. And with Ryen Russillo, maybe you have him. Maybe he doesn't work as his own podcast. Maybe he does. I don't. I know his YouTube numbers aren't as large as I'm sure they'd like to be, but I think he was around 50,000. But they had a really good panel, a really good NBA panel, and it was right there. It was all in place, and now Ryan is leaving, and I don't know what more. When I say I don't know what more Bill Simmons could have done, I'm not saying that Bill Simmons couldn't have done more, but I'm saying what could have Bill Simmons have done to make the Ringer more attractive, and where it's not. I get the sense that the Ringer is stagnating. That's just my impression from afar, as someone who doesn't listen to. I really just listen to Bill Simmons. On occasion, I would listen to Ryen Russillo. On occasion, I listen to Zach Lowe. And then also the McShay show. I listened to that when there was the Shador Sanders, the Shador Sanders attention because he wasn't drafted. I was interested in that, and I thought Todd McShay did a good job covering it. But I'm mildly interested in the NFL, more so interested in the NBA. And on that note, one very interesting thing that I just found out about before this podcast, because I was looking into Ryan leaving. is we have this Bill Simmons podcast about the Bill Simmons podcast. So this is not Bill Simmons. This is someone else who is covering the Bill Simmons podcast. And I listened to the emergency pod with Ryen Russillo leaving for Barstool, and I thought it was decent. I thought it was interesting because it gives me insight and a lot of the background that I don't have. So clearly, there are levels to this game, and we have this one person who has this podcast, and this one episode was 31 minutes, but I thought he did a really good job covering it, providing the background, and it's just a lot of the context that you don't have as someone who is just. I think with Bill Simmons, I'm definitely subscribed. I listen to I used to listen to most of the podcasts, and when I say used to, 2 months ago, I was listening to almost every podcast he'd publish. That's fallen off. But what's interesting here is we get the background here, and we see that I think Bill Simmons is there are more politics going on and more just behind the scenes on happenings that than I'm even aware of, because I'm just going to Bill Simmons for the content. But of course, there are stories that are unfolding, personal relationships that are going on, and so I thought it was a very interesting find. This is a good podcast if you want to get more background on Ryen Russillo and why this the person behind this, who I don't know who it is, but the person behind this talks about why Ryan left and why it was a good idea. So here's the podcast. It's got 3.5 stars. I haven't looked at the reviews yet, but they do get very detailed. So it's a great idea because there's a lot of interest in the Bill Simmons podcast, but it's hard to find information about it. And one thing I don't understand about this podcast, so here we have the subreddit Bill Simmons. I don't know if this guy owns the subreddit. If he does, that's very interesting to actually own the subreddit Bill Simmons. I thought the Bill Simmons subreddit was controlled by Bill Simmons himself and the Ringer, but maybe not, because here we see it's being promoted on this sub podcast, which it's not a sub podcast, but this one podcast about Bill Simmons. It says a podcast discussing Bill Simmons, the BS Pod, the podcast, sports media, and a lot more, not affiliated with Bill Simmons or the Ringer. Okay, so let's go back to the big word. We have forced news. So the other thing I wanted to add is just something top of mind. I talked about how selective I am with media. I only listen. There's only so much content I can absorb. I'll tell you. Recently, I was rewatching the X-Files. I was rewatching Billions, and the Bill Simmons podcast is obviously something I listen to. Another personality that I like listening to is the MMA guru. I follow the UFC. And when I say I follow the UFC, I really track what's going on Reddit. But one thing I do not want is the news. I avoid the news as much as possible because, for the most part, it's just poison. But we see it forced. And so if you're on LinkedIn, if you go to LinkedIn, I go to LinkedIn for business purposes, and it's there. The news is in the top right corner. If you go into YouTube, if you're searching, they force alternative search results that are related to something that you might be interested but aren't relevant to the search you just made. And then so what comes up is fear. For me, I get a mix, but one thing I really despise are the fear mongering videos, and you have the fear mongering thumbnails, because that's just a spike, right? Like a spike to your brain, like fear this. This is so bad, it's going to happen, and I just absolutely hate those videos. But it's like it's the news, and it comes through just on YouTube when I'm not looking for it at all. If we go to Bing, I don't know if I have Bing pulled up. I think I do. So here's Bing, right? If I want to search in Bing, sometimes I search in Bing as opposed to Google just to look at search engine rankings. But here we have just nothing but really negative news, negative or neutral news over and over and over again. And it just does not stop. And it's something that I try to stay away from as much as possible. But we see the news, like it's like, you have to know about this. Like if you're going to go to these major websites, even with Google search, there's the trends, the autocomplete search trends or whatever it is. And so that forces you to know about the news. Now, I found out that you can turn that off, but still, the point is that we are constantly we constantly see news that is shoehorned into our online experiences, and I try to stay away from this as much as possible. And I have this has been the case for me for years that I have stopped paying attention to the news, and I much more enjoy this side of willful ignorance than I do of being aware of all of these various things that have happened. If something's really important, or if something's really, very newsworthy, I'll find out about it anyway. But forced news was one thing I was thinking about recently, because just because it's always it's coming up in YouTube or LinkedIn or somewhere else, no matter what. Now, one other thing I found out about recently is Dan Batard. Actually, this is a clip. Let's actually play a clip from the Pablo Torre podcast.
I have found the way journalists have reacted to your story to be super interesting, in that it seems to me like a whole lot of people don't want your reporting to be true, when what I do know about your reporting is it's exhaustive, and I want people to understand that you've got lawyers listening in on every conversation.
Yeah, so I picked up on the same thing. So sometimes it's, we don't have empirical data, we don't have an exact, we don't know this for certain, but it seems to me, I like the way Dan Le Batard said that, it seems to me that a lot of people don't want his reporting to be true. And that came across, and I have some videos on that. It's like, yes, like a lot of people, you get the sense it's like they're moving away from it, even though this story is obvious, right? Like, and when I say obvious, it doesn't even have to imply that the Clippers actually violated the collective bargaining agreement. Just that uh, it seems like this story is relevant and it's something that should be covered. And if you're covering this story, you're just talking about it as it appears. But if you have a bias, if there's something that is pulling you away from the story, it comes across, and it has. And we've seen so many different people, different media personalities, really just spike this story, or what's a better word? Just disinterest in the story. Not nothing they didn't want to cover it. They didn't want to talk about how the Clippers could have circumvented the salary cap. They wanted to not only just downplay it, but just really um, not cover it. Very much disinterested. I can't come up with the right word right now, but Dan Le Batard's right. Like, it's just, a lot of people were not interested in this story when it's an absolutely fantastic story. It's an incredible story. It's there are so many dynamics that are fascinating about it. One of the best stories we've seen in quite a while, and a seemingly organic story. And I say organic because this wasn't anything where we had a sponsorship. This wasn't anything where it was placed. This was an investigative journalist finding out information, spending months to research, and then he presents the story in a very creative way and presents extremely compelling evidence, shows us documentation, is hiding nothing. And so here's the information, and then we have so many people really scatter and run away from the information. So many people that should be covering it because it is in the scope of their job, and they really didn't, or they didn't want to. And so one example of this, a prime example, is Bobby Marks on ESPN, when he had one of the early reactions, and he and I've covered this. He repeatedly says the Clippers aren't dumb. He doesn't, interesting story, but he doesn't think anything will happen of this. We even saw Brian Windhorst really, they talk about it, but really a disinterest. And from ESPN side, the only one I can remember of when I was watching was Tim McMahon had he seemed to have like a genuine reaction, but we didn't hear much from him. But Dan here is right, and it just a lot of people were not interested in the story, and it makes you, this actually shows a lot. Just the very reactions from the story are actually quite revealing. And so this is one of the angles that I've covered so much on the channel. Is just the media's reaction, because it is worthy. That in itself is newsworthy to this story. Let's continue on. Let's see here. So one of the things that I found out through Pablo Torre's reporting is that Dan Batard is actually funding Pablo. So Dan is, I think, Pablo's employer, and I don't know. So I'm interested now in Meadowlark Media, because it is the media company that Pablo he mentions. Or I can't remember what the connection is with Meadowlark, but I think Pablo's reporting falls under Meadowlark Media, and I think that is tied to Dan. But either way, I think Dan, if he's invested in Pablo or if he's associated with Pablo, obviously that's now looking to be a brilliant investment. That's one of those investments where you just put money in, you place, and then you hope one of them hits. And Pablo's talent is shining through. One thing that I don't think, or I think gets overlooked, is that Pablo is so creative. The way he's done this, the way he's gone about this, is very, very creative. So I think some of the brilliance, like Dan Batard, seems like he's a clever, like a smart guy. Like he just seems like he would, it's something where he's familiar with media, and he probably saw something in Pablo, and that led to him. Either I don't know what the relationship is right now. So this is something that's of interest to me, and it's not. I don't think it's overtly obvious as to what exactly their tie is. I don't know if he's an investor. I mean, actually, Pablo has said, I think, that Dan is the one that is funding this research, and then maybe he is his employer, if I remember correctly. But either way, obviously, a really smart move by Dan. So another interesting part is that Pablo has, in a way, come out of nowhere. And so my introduction to Pablo was Bill Simmons having him one-on-one on his podcast. And this was a result of Bill Simmons taking really for no reason stating, or not for no reason, but he just decided to add in one of his podcast episodes that we're going to play now that Pablo wasn't a real journalist. So let's listen to this now.
He's coming back.
And that's why.
Yeah.
And no one had ever seen anybody recover from a knee injury like that without surgery.
Yeah.
He,
Right.
he basically did it with health training
with whey protein
Yeah.
and liver.
and steroids.
Pablo Torre would have done a long podcast about Leo Farnsworth trying to practice with the team, and then done a media tour about it afterwards.
This fucking guy, bro.
I've never seen anybody dying on the stupider story for a week and a half while pretending you're a journalist. What the fuck was that?
Whoa!
Seriously.
So I don't know why Bill Simmons took it that far. And of course, I don't watch the rewatchables, but here we have the clip. I'll link to this in the description, but Bill Simmons really wanted to say that. And that shows, one thing that shows is like he was holding, like he had that, right? He was waiting to say something about Pablo, and he didn't like the Bill Belichick story that Pablo had extensively reported on Bill Belichick and his relationship with his girlfriend. And Bill Simmons took exception to that. I don't know why though. That was very much a lash out. But why are you lashing out on a story that isn't about you? And it's like, if he wanted to say something, he could have been just more upfront and open about it, rather than you go and you take this swipe that someone's not a real journalist because they are continually reporting on the story. Let's just play it one more time because he does say, I think he gets at he's pretending to be
Back from an injury.
a journalist.
Oh, wait. Pendleton. Oh, so Pendleton had hurt his knee.
He lost his job. He was coming back.
And that's why.
Yeah.
And no one had ever seen anybody recover from a knee injury like that without surgery.
Yeah.
He,
Right.
he basically did it with health training
with whey protein
Yeah.
and liver.
and steroids.
Pablo Torre would have done a long podcast about Leo Farnsworth trying to practice with the team, and then done a media tour about it afterwards.
This fucking guy, bro.
I've never seen anybody dying on the stupider story for a week and a half while pretending you're a journalist. What the fuck was that?
Whoa!
Seriously.
What the
Oh,
fuck?
Belichick's dating a girl. Oh, let me do 9 shows
Stop,
about
I
it.
can't tell. Are you
Settle the fuck down.
If this was about Jeffrey Lurie, though,
What?
would you be like, we got to get.
So it's one thing for him, Bill, to state this and have this interject this commentary on Pablo's reporting, but then Bill Simmons had him on the show. And so we have a one-on-one with Pablo. And this is where I find out that Pablo even exists. I have no idea who Pablo Torre is. But then he comes on the show and they have a one-on-one. And I don't usually watch Bill Simmons on YouTube. I listen to him. I listen to his podcast. So I didn't even get to see the physical interaction here. But I want to just play a quick clip from this podcast.
Just to figure out when and where this was said. But I was there, like, pathetically, like, looking at my phone as very serious journalism was honored, and I was, like, totally distracted.
Oh.
So fuck you for that.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
You know, ruining
I'm sorry, I ruined
the crowning journalistic nomination of my life while being questioned for being a real journalist.
So Pablo, looking back at this, and I haven't watched a lot of this, but I remember that, and it really set the tone for the rest of the podcast because Bill was really backtracking at that point. And I don't know why Bill Simmons brought him on. He immediately was taking this stance of like, hey, there's not really a rift here. Let's just talk this through. But that's not how he came across in that Rewatchables episode. He came across very much angry, right? Like he was going to lash out at Pablo, and then you have Pablo face to face, and then you don't lash out at him. And then he did say something that he thought the story was stupid, and they talked it through. But this was definitely a win for Pablo if we're just looking at it very simply. Because he came in here and Bill Simmons didn't, it'd be different, I think, if Bill Simmons would have continued on. I don't think this is a real story. I don't know why you're covering this. And he did talk about that, but it wasn't the same Bill Simmons that we saw in the Rewatchables clip where he was saying that you're dining on a story and you're pretending you're a journalist and so on. So this is my introduction to Pablo Torre, and I still don't know that much about him other than his Clipper scandal reporting has been outstanding, and he's extremely creative. Obviously, a very intelligent guy, but he's really burst onto the scenes, and now he's completely in the mainstream. So his stock is white hot, and I wanted to cover that. And then here, let's just add on to that. We have this other dynamic continuing on with Pablo's story. We do have one thing I keep thinking about is the tension here, the tension in the Clippers scandal. And we've got the gravity of a $153.4 billion man. And he's taken this hard stance. He showed up on ESPN and he said, we have not cheated. And he very much has dug into the position of we've done nothing wrong. And now, as I was talking about earlier, with the media personalities, going off of what Dan Batard said, we've got the NBA and Mark Cuban leaning to the side. It's like when you can see the magnetic pull, or just someone is going on a direction, and like maybe they're trying to stay center, but they're actually visibly not center. And I think that's what's happening with the story is you just see the gravity of so much wealth. And Steve Ballmer being the whale among whales among whales. I mean, we're talking top 7, top 8 whales in the world. This is the biggest category, the biggest classification of whales. And it's you can see it affecting people. Anybody that's connected in some way. Look at Mark Cuban. What is Mark Cuban even doing right now? He's making himself look ridiculous over and over again, repeatedly. And he keeps doing it. And so you see the power of that money just coming through the screen. You see, it really doesn't come across like the NBA wants there to be any problem here, and not because the NBA wants to have this league um, that's has integrity and is run the right way. It's because they don't want it to be true about the Clippers. And the problem is, this is different than a lot of other scenarios we've come across where it's not been. This has been something that we don't have access to the documents. We now have access to the documents. So it's public knowledge. So we've got the documents and the truth versus the power and the money. And when you look at Steve Ballmer's power, it's actually, and in terms of power, I'm speaking of money. His market cap is actually larger than the entirety of the NBA. So that shows you why there's so much leaning. Of course, the ESPN is entertainment. They are aligned with the NBA. And so this story is going to continue on. And what the NBA is doing is they are using the delay tactic. So they're using they're trying to use time to their advantage. We'll see if it does work out to their advantage. Right now, I have noticed that the story's interest is slowly waning. Not that it's going away, but just right now, Pablo hasn't had any additional podcasts on it. There haven't been any other additional reactions. So really, it's starting to settle. But this is one where we're going to have a showdown. And right now, we can see that tension throughout the NBA sphere, where we've got the $153.4 billion man and his insistence that the Clippers have done nothing wrong. And then we've got all of the connected NBA entities also leaning that way. And then you have really the public seeing what's right in front of them and stating, what is this, right? Like, how do you explain this? And I should say the public and the independents like Meadowlark Media, obviously with Pablo. You have David Sampson and you have others, and it's right there, and there's so much tension. And I think this is a very interesting aspect to this that's overlaying the entire story. And with this story, it's not going to end here. This is the start. This is just the initial story, but we have so much that's going to come from this story. I think we're going to see more investigative journalists. We're going to see more information coming out that's going to find its way out into the public. And also, there's the AI component of this, to where now research is easier and we can look through data faster. And so more truth is going to come to the surface. And it's not just going to be the NBA that's going to be looked at. We're going to see this across so many different industries and sectors. And so this is really the start. This is very much a milestone moment, and one where I've wanted to cover it for multiple reasons. But one is I'm interested in it, and the people that I normally would go to learn about this, the primary one being Bill Simmons, but just really there hasn't been a lot of coverage on it. And when I say coverage, I mean real coverage, not just, hey, here's the story and let's relay to you what's going on. No, I want to see people actually breaking this down. Like, here is exactly what's happening. Here is this explained. Here's what this means. And so I haven't had to, but I've wanted to watch Pablo's episodes multiple times to really understand what's actually going on and then be able to relay it on my channel. And so, yeah, this story is very interesting. Of course, someone actually posted this in the comments the other day, is that this one's actually going to be, on Netflix as a docuseries or something. I definitely think so. This is so interesting, and we have so much tension here. And eventually, this is going to reach an endpoint, and it's very interesting as to what that could be. Which leaves me to my final tile, which is coming soon. So, what do I have next? Coming up is I'm going to look into the $118 million that was transferred from the Clippers to Aspiration. And when I say look into, just break down what's happening. I don't have, I'm not combing through any documents, although you can find some of the documents for the bankruptcy proceedings online. So it's interesting to look through those. But I'm just going to break that down, talk about what this means, look at the subsequent payments that were made that Pablo reported on, and just break those down. And then the other part here is I'm going to look into the best possible defense for the Los Angeles Clippers. So this is one thing that I've been working on or just thinking through recently, is just how do we defend the Clippers? If I wanted to defend the Clippers, how is this possible? And that's, I think, which is what is especially difficult or bad for the Clippers, is it's actually difficult to come up with defenses for them. Now, normally you can come up with something, but here it's very, very hard to excuse away some of the transactions, some of the happenings, some of the occurrences. It's actually difficult to explain some of this away, but that's what I'm going to attempt to do. So I think that is one that's one I actually really want to do, because it's taking the other side, and it really, if when you look at this from the other side and you try to make sense of it, it actually makes Pablo's reporting so much stronger, because you see it's like, okay, the documents are telling here, right? And if I'm Pablo, I'm really focusing in on those documents. The testimony is great, or maybe not testimony, but the sources are great, and having those sources, I'm sure, are extremely helpful when he is getting these documents, and he's able. That's how this story is really as strong as it is because he has these sources, and they were able to help him with the documents. One other interesting side note here is I would like to know how Pablo actually got a hold of this story. I know there was a bankruptcy proceeding, but how did Pablo know to look into the bankruptcy proceeding? Like, who pointed him there? So that's another good side story. So more podcasts like this coming out. Usually I have such a deliberate way of saying things, and what happens with my recordings is I usually take several takes before I actually have the right one, because I just, I'll say the wrong words, or I will something won't be portrayed the way I want it to be. But I do want to actually have more podcast-style podcasts coming out and covering the topics that aren't being covered. That's really, this channel is looking into the in-between aspects of so many different things that really don't get the coverage that I think they should, or just have interest. And it's not always about sports. You heard me talking about the Force News, but I do recognize that there's just such an interest in sports. And right now, I'm definitely going to continue to cover the Pablo Torre story, because it's one that is worthy of that much attention and that much scrutiny. And right now, even of the media outlets that are covering it, mainstream and independent, we don't see the level of detail when you have this type of story. It's actually such an important story that it deserves to be looked at and poured over and over again. And I covered actually one of my videos that hasn't been viewed a lot, but I think will end up being a video that has a lot of potential later on, is the Adam Silver video of what did Adam Silver know? Because when I see him coming out with his first statement, right, something he's had a week to think about, a week to prepare for, and he's asked a question, and his answer begins with, "I've never heard of them before." And he wasn't asked, "Have you ever heard of Aspiration before?" That to me says something. And it doesn't have to mean anything. But now I wish that Dan Roberts, who was interviewing him at the Front Office Sports Tuned In Summit, where he backtracked, he said that he actually had heard of Aspiration before. I wish in that moment that Dan Roberts had asked him, "Okay, well, when had you heard of Aspiration, and what did you know about them, and what have you learned leading up to Pablo's podcast? So you could get that more of a candid reaction. So that would have been the question to ask there as I'm pouring over. So while I'm researching these videos, so that I have a recording and I'm watching the video, so I know what the different subject matters. Sometimes the interviewers are working against themselves because they're so eager to add in something else, and they're not just letting it play out. And you see some missed opportunities in the interviews. And this is definitely not to say that I would do any better, but looking back with the advantage of pausing videos and watching them over and over again and thinking about the subjects, you can see there are some real opportunities that have been left on the side just because the interviewer likely didn't recognize it at the time. But that would have been one. That would have really been one at that front office sports summit. But we heard Dan Roberts. He then proceeded to ask him something else, and it was like that was the follow up. If he could have got that follow up, it would have been a really good one. But I do think that that is one angle where I hadn't seen anybody else ask, well, what did he know? Because he says he's aware of them before, and he talks about how he wasn't aware of them in the context of these accusations. Okay, well, let us in on what exactly were you aware of? And as the NBA commissioner, this shouldn't be looked at as a question that's just simply inquisitive and just trying to find out more information. But when he gets caught in a lie, then you have a real problem, because now I'm even talking about him. He's a part of this story. The very fact that he lied makes him a part of this story. But I want to know why he lied. Why is he now caught in? Why was he caught in his own words? And why did he start out volunteering that he had never heard of them before? And he states it so many different times, and then he has to backtrack that. And so now, to me, I'm focusing in on that. That's something where I'm looking. Not to say there are more videos coming up about it. I've already covered it, right? There's nothing more for me to add to my video. I'll link to that one below too. But that's the Adam Silver. What did he know about Aspiration video? But that is one of these details. But I'm looking at these podcasts and I'm looking at the reactions, and we have a lot, but at the same time we don't have that much. Mark Cuban is the one that has really talked a lot about this, so he's the one to focus in on. Adam Silver has only had a few brief snippets from the front office sports tuned in summit where he was actually talking about Aspiration. We've seen Steve Ballmer on his ESPN interview. That's a big interview. Not that he said all that much, but he took his stance right there. So then he's got that stance, and then he addressed it also in I don't know what scenario it was, but he was also a part of I think it was not a panel, but he was in some type of conference, and he was asked if he would like to make a comment about Aspiration, and he did. So there wasn't too much there, but we do have Pablo's podcast. I have to think that there is at least one more podcast coming. One advantage that Pablo has that I think is very interesting is that he's in complete control. He already knows all of the information he has. He knows when he's going to release it, and he can release it at any time. He can wait on it. He can wait on it for 2 months. And he's really got an advantage here. And that is in part why because he's done this so well, that's why there's so much tension that exists. You have the documents, you have an investigative journalist who has so much information, and what he knows is to some extent unknown by the NBA and the various players in the game. And when I say players, I'm referring to all of the people that are really wanting to downplay this and look at this in the most favorable light to the NBA, to the Clippers, and not just trying to find out what actually happened here. We've even seen a story, and I talked about this a little bit earlier. We saw the story come out or not the story, but I think it was Spot Track. We had a tweet, and it was stating that this is likely not going to come out until after the All-Star game. They're not going to have a conclusion until after the All-Star game. That looks like the delay. That looks like going into the normal bag of tricks, the standard bag of tricks, and deciding we need to draw this out, open up potential options like an accordion style, like, hey, we'll just expand this. We give ourselves more time. We let the story dissipate as much as possible. And we try to draw this out so people lose attention, and it just doesn't have the same momentum as it started out with. But I don't think this one's not going to be forgotten, and this one's not going to play out the same way as it usually does, because we're not going to have that same level of bureaucracy and having things behind a wall. That wall's not there anymore. The document is out. That's the problem, is the documents are out. So with that, it's no longer about what someone's saying. It's public knowledge now. We can see those documents, we can see those facts, and now you've got to work around them. What's going to be especially difficult is we've already had these initial defenses come out and these initial statements come out. So Adam Silver has stated that he hasn't heard of aspiration before, and then now he says that he has. So he's made those statements. We've seen Steve Ballmer with his interview. So there's some boxing in that's happening. But going back to the delay game, one last anecdote that I will end this podcast with is in 2010, and I know these details decently because I almost recorded a video on this. But in 2010, we have a Brett Favre story, and I remember the Brett Favre story because I kept waiting to see what the NFL was going to do because they were in a difficult position. There was tension then because it was known that this was Brett Favre's for real last season. So, of course, Brett Favre had retired and unretired before, and I don't know how many times he went back and forth, but this was his last season, and there was a sexting scandal with, I believe, between him and a Jets intern named Jen Sturger. And so this information had come forth, and the NFL was investigating it. And what the NFL kept doing was, you can easily take this approach with investigations where you just say, well, we need to gather all the facts. We want to make sure that we have all of the information, which the beauty of saying that is it's also true. Like, you don't want to rush to have information. You want to make sure you're making an informed decision, and one where you're not being influenced by the public pressure. So there is an angle where that is certainly true, but what the NFL was doing was just kicking that can until the end of the season, and so they really just ran the clock out. That was Brett Favre's last season. Towards the last few weeks of the season, we have an article come out from ESPN that basically states that, hey, the NFL couldn't find anything, but they've fined Brett Favre $50,000 because he wasn't forthright with the investigations. But because he wasn't forthright, they couldn't uncover the information. And then so really the story just goes away and is pushed to the side, and we move on to the next thing because the NFL, that obviously the NFL was in control there. They let the story continue on. It was so that it lasted so many weeks, and I think that came out in the third to the last week of the season. But by then, the Vikings were eliminated from postseason contention. Brett Favre was actually inactive for, I think, 3 of the 4 last games. So that was one way that the delay tactic was used, because time is material. So one advantage here is that when you are the league, you or another corporation, whatever it is, you have the advantage of using time and stating that we're looking into this. But at the same time, you just take a really long time to look into this. And we know that the NBA has hired their law firm, Wachtell, and I don't remember the rest of the name, but the Wachtell law firm is now investigating this. But what the other part of this is that, to my knowledge, that investigation, that report, doesn't necessarily become public. In fact, I don't think it has to. It's up to the NBA. I would be very curious to see if the NBA releases that. I don't think they will, but maybe they will. I don't know the NBA's track record on releasing investigations, but this is their report from Walktail. It is not the public's report, but it is Walktail's reputation that's also potentially at stake here. So that's another angle that adds even more tension, is because what if this investigation comes back and there is it comes back with really bad news for the Clippers and finds that the Clippers have circumvented the salary cap. That is also interesting. And if I'm the Clippers, to me, this could have been not nearly as big of a deal if we had just ended this. If we just, right after this story comes out, you know what? This is true. We were overzealous trying to win a championship. Steve Ballmer is hyper competitive. We just took it too far and we broke the rules. And then that's it. And it's not, to me, that's not nearly like, that's something that we're already moving past at this point. Yes, it happened. But to me, it's just not that, it's not as nearly as big of a deal. But now it really is, because we have a showdown and we have the tension I've talked about, and we have the showdown with the NBA and with Steve Ballmer and with Pablo Torre and the public knowledge. And now everything's going to come to a head. So it makes for great content, which I will be covering. But it also, it speaks to a lot of the dynamics that we see. I think it creates for an interesting story. And so the delay game, while it is an effective tactic here, I don't think it will be nearly as effective because the documents are out and this isn't just a back and forth. And it may be the case that the NBA does come back and they go ahead with this very thin defense that the Clippers are able to muster, and they state similarly, much like the NFL did with the Brett Favre case, where, hey, look, there just wasn't enough here for us to actually take any action, and then maybe come out with some middle ground penalty where it looks like we still don't like what you did. We don't know, but you do need to act, more precise when it comes to dealing with these different companies and these different sponsorships. So more due diligence should have been done. So we are going to penalize you for this, but it's not for the actual matter at hand of salary cap circumvention. There could be a possibility for that. And I will be talking about the Clippers' best defense, the best possible defense that I can come up with for the Clippers. That will be an upcoming episode, but we will close this one. And if there are any updates or anything else that I think to add, I will include that in the description.